Have you ever watched someone you love begin to change in ways so subtle you barely noticed at first, only to realize later that those faint shifts were the early whispers of something much larger? Over the past year, perhaps you've seen it. A loved one growing quieter, weaker, or more distant, their familiar spark dimming like a candle flickering in a draught. Many of us imagine death in old age as a sudden event, a light switching off without warning. But the truth is far more complex, far more human. The body often sends quiet signals, soft alarms that echo for months, sometimes even a full year, before life gently reaches its final chapter. These signs are easy to miss, cloaked as they are in the ordinary guise of aging. It's only in hindsight, when the pieces fall into place, that families see the trail of clues they overlooked. Clues that, if understood earlier, could have offered precious time to prepare, to connect, to make those fleeting moments truly matter. In this journey we're about to take together, we'll uncover 5 key signs that often emerge in the year before an elderly loved one passes away. Some might already feel familiar. Small changes you've brushed aside as just getting older. Others may surprise you, revealing how even the tiniest shifts can hint at the body's gradual decline. Recognizing these signals isn't about dwelling on loss. It's about seizing the chance to act with intention. It's about weaving a tapestry of care, comfort, and cherished memories in the time you have left. By understanding these signs, you can ensure your loved one's final stage is wrapped in dignity, peace, and the warmth of your presence, while preparing your own heart for what lies ahead. So stay with me until the end. These insights could transform how you navigate this tender season, offering clarity where there's confusion and strength where there's uncertainty. Let's begin. Number 1. Significant weight loss. Picture your grandmother at the kitchen table. The woman who once piled your plate high with her famous roast chicken and laughed as you asked for seconds. Now, her fork hovers uncertainly over a half-eaten meal, her appetite a shadow of what it once was. Her favorite sweater, the one she wore every Sunday, suddenly hangs loose on her frame, the fabric pooling where it once fit snugly. At first, it's easy to shrug it off. A tighter belt here, a skipped snack there. She's just slowing down, you tell yourself. It's normal at her age, but deep down, a quiet unease stirs. This isn't just aging. This is significant, unintentional weight loss, one of the earliest and most telling signs that her body may be nearing its final year. It starts subtly, almost imperceptibly. A few pounds slip away, unnoticed amidst the rhythm of daily life. Clothes feel roomier, cheekbones sharpen beneath thinning skin, and the hearty hunger that once defined her fades into indifference. Families often dismiss it as a natural part of growing older. After all, don't we all lose a little muscle with time? But this is different. When weight drops without effort, without a change in habits, it's rarely benign. It's the body whispering a truth we're reluctant to hear. Its systems are winding down. Nutrients aren't being absorbed as they should. Muscle mass ebbs away, not just from age, but from a deeper struggle within. The digestive process, once a reliable engine, sputters. Proteins go unprocessed, energy stores dwindle, and strength slips through her fingers like sand. Take Margaret, a sprightly 82-year-old who once tended her garden with vigor. Her daughter Lisa noticed the change last spring. Margaret's jeans, once snug from years of hearty meals, began sliding down her hips. "I'm just not hungry," she'd say, pushing away a plate of her beloved mashed potatoes. Lisa chalked it up to a picky phase, until Margaret's arms, once strong enough to carry watering cans, grew frail, trembling as she reached for a glass. The truth was stark. Her body wasn't just aging, it was retreating. Muscle wasting had set in, a silent thief stealing her vitality. This loss doesn't just weaken the frame, it heightens the risk of falls, dims the immune system's glow, and opens the door to infections that linger longer than they should. Then there's the appetite itself, a once reliable compass now spinning aimlessly. For many elderly individuals, food loses its allure. Taste buds, dulled by time, turn meals into a chore rather than a joy. The scent of warm bread or the tang of a ripe tomato no longer stirs the senses. Margaret began skipping breakfast, nibbling only crumbs at lunch. "It doesn't taste right anymore," she'd murmur, her voice tinged with resignation. This isn't mere preference. It's physiology shifting. The body, sensing its end, no longer urges the brain to seek sustenance with the same urgency. Energy fades, strength wanes, and the decline deepens, a slow unraveling of the life she once knew. Underlying conditions often lurk beneath this surface. Chronic illnesses, cancer with its stealthy spread, heart failure with its faltering rhythm, kidney disease with its quiet sabotage, can trigger weight loss long before their full weight is felt. Even depression, a heavy cloak over the mind, or cognitive decline, scattering focus, can sap the will to eat, setting off a spiral where the body starves for fuel it can no longer demand. Lisa tried everything, cooking Margaret's childhood favorites, blending protein shakes with a hopeful smile. But the scale kept tipping downward. It wasn't about willpower or taste. It was her body preparing for a transition beyond their control. For families like Lisa's, this stage can feel like a call to action. Feed her more, fix the problem. But when efforts falter, when the weight still slips away, it's time to shift perspective. Forcing heaping plates won't rewind the clock. Instead, focus on what brings comfort. A warm broth she can sip slowly, a piece of soft fruit that soothes rather than overwhelms, a glass of water to ease her parched lips. Hydration and gentle nourishment become lifelines, not to halt the inevitable, but to cradle her in care. If you see this in someone you love, eating less, weakening day by day, fading before your eyes, don't turn away. This isn't just about a shrinking waistline or a hollowed face. It's the body sending a message, a fragile plea for attention. Heed it now, and you'll find the clarity to act with compassion, to weave meaning into every remaining moment. You'll hold her hand a little tighter, linger in her presence a little longer, knowing time is a gift you can still shape. Number 2, extreme fatigue and weakness. Imagine your father, A man who once hoisted you onto his shoulders as a child, who spent his weekends tinkering in the garage or mowing the lawn with a whistle on his lips. Now, you find him dozing in his favorite armchair, the one with the worn leather arms, his tools gathering dust in the corner. At first, it's just a longer nap after lunch, a slower step as he shuffles to the kitchen. "I'm just tired," he says, with a faint smile, brushing it off as a passing wave. But the exhaustion lingers, deepening into something heavier, something unshakable. This isn't the tiredness of a busy day, it's a profound, bone-deep fatigue that clings like damp fog, a sign that his body is nearing the end of its long, steadfast journey. This fatigue isn't fleeting. It's not the kind a good night's sleep can sweep away. It's a relentless weight that transforms even the simplest tasks into mountains too steep to climb. Getting out of bed becomes a negotiation with gravity, each movement deliberate, each breath a quiet labor. Walking from the living room to the porch, a distance he once covered with ease, now demands pauses, a hand braced against the wall for support. The routines he once cherished, buttoning his shirt, stirring a pot of soup, or sharing a story over coffee, slip from his grasp, too draining to sustain. You watch him sink into silence mid-sentence, his eyes fluttering shut, as if the effort of speaking has sapped the last of his reserves. Meet Harold, a retired mechanic whose hands once danced over engines with precision. His son Daniel remembers the man who'd rise at dawn, fueled by black coffee and a love for fixing things. But last fall, Harold's energy began to fade. He'd shuffle to the garage, tools in hand, only to return minutes later, pale and breathless. "I'll finish it tomorrow," he'd mutter, collapsing into his chair. Tomorrow stretched into weeks, then months. The spark in his hazel eyes dulled, replaced by a weariness that no rest could lift. This wasn't laziness or lack of will, it was his body conserving what little strength remained. As organs slow, the heart pumping less forcefully, the lungs drawing shallower breaths, energy is rationed, redirected from movement to mere survival. The science beneath this exhaustion is as poignant as it is inevitable. Harold's circulation, once a steady river, now trickles, delivering less oxygen to muscles that ache for it. His metabolism, the engine of his vitality, shifts into a lower gear, prioritizing preservation over action. Sleep becomes his refuge. Long naps stretching across the afternoon, nights bleeding into mornings. Daniel noticed the pattern. Harold might seem alert for an hour, chuckling at a memory, only to slump suddenly, his head nodding as if an unseen hand had pulled a plug. These energy crashes aren't random. They're the body's quiet recalibration, a signal that its reserves are nearly spent. But the toll isn't just physical, it carves into the soul. Harold, once proud of his independence, now winces as Daniel lifts the grocery bags he can't carry. Frustration flickers across his weathered face when he can't join the family for a walk, his legs too unsteady to trust. "I hate feeling useless," he confessed one evening, his voice cracking with a vulnerability Daniel had never heard. This fatigue isolates him, not because he's lost interest, but because he's lost the strength to engage. Hobbies fade, His model trains sit untouched, their tracks a silent testament to a life he can no longer live. Conversations dwindle, not from apathy, but from the sheer effort they demand. He withdraws, not by choice, but by necessity, retreating into a world where energy is a currency he can't afford to spend. For families like Daniel's, this shift is a quiet heartbreak. It's tempting to urge him on. Just try, Dad. You'll feel better, as if willpower could reignite what's fading. But pushing only deepens the frustration, for him and for you. The truth is, this exhaustion isn't a hurdle to overcome, it's a message to heed. Harold's body is telling him, and you, that its priorities have changed. What matters now isn't how much he can do, but how much peace he can find. Daniel learned to adapt. He'd sit beside Harold in silence, sharing a cup of tea, letting the stillness speak where words couldn't. He'd drape a blanket over his father's shoulders, adjust the pillows, and let rest be a gift rather than a defeat. If you see this in someone you love, days swallowed by sleep, strength slipping like water through cupped hands, don't mistake it for surrender. It's their body in transition, a slow turning of the page. This is your moment to meet them where they are, to listen without expectation, to comfort without demand. Cherish the quiet exchanges, a shared glance, a gentle touch, knowing these are the threads that bind you still. Fatigue may steal their energy, but it can't steal the love they feel or the love you give. Hold that close, and you'll carry them through this season with grace. Number 3, increased cognitive confusion or withdrawal. Close your eyes for a moment and picture your aunt, the one who always had a quick wit and a story for every occasion. She'd sit at the head of the table during family dinners, her laughter ringing out as she recounted tales of her youth, how she outsmarted her brothers in a game of cards or navigated a bustling city with nothing but a map and her instincts. Now, though, her voice falters mid-story. She stares at the salt shaker as if it's a stranger, her brow furrowing as she searches for a word that won't come. "What day is it again?" she asks, her tone tinged with unease, even though you've answered twice already. These aren't just senior moments, they're threads unraveling in the tapestry of her mind, subtle yet striking signs that her final year may be drawing near. This shift in cognition creeps in like dusk, so gradual you might not notice until the light is nearly gone. One day, she's sharp as ever, teasing you about your haircut. The next, she's repeating the same question, "Where's her coat?" when it's draped over her chair. Familiar places turn foreign. The grocery store she's shopped at for decades becomes a maze, the aisles twisting into confusion. Names slip away. Yours, her neighbors, even her own sometimes, and time blurs, yesterday melding into last month. It's not the occasional forgetfulness we all experience, it's a deeper drift, a quiet fraying of the mind's edges that can begin months, even a year before the end. Consider Evelyn, a retired librarian whose love for books once filled her home with towering stacks of novels and poetry. Her niece Sarah adored her aunt's razor-sharp memory, Evelyn could recite entire passages of Dickinson or recall the plot of a book she'd read decades ago. But last summer, Sarah noticed a change. Evelyn began misplacing her glasses, only to find them atop her head, chuckling nervously at the oversight. Then came the phone calls, 3 in an hour, each time asking if Sarah was coming to visit, forgetting they'd just spoken. One afternoon, Evelyn stood in her kitchen, staring at the stove, unable to remember how to boil water for tea. "I used to know this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and shame. Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't just aging. It was Evelyn's mind retreating, piece by fragile piece. The science behind this is as heartbreaking as it is precise. The brain, that intricate web of thought and memory, relies on a steady stream of oxygen and nutrients carried by the blood. As circulation weakens in the body's final phase, that stream slows to a trickle. Neurons falter, connections dim, and the clarity Evelyn once wielded like a lantern begins to flicker. Confusion sets in. Decisions as simple as what to wear become riddles, and familiar faces blur into strangers. She might shine with sudden lucidity, laughing at an old joke, only to drift moments later into a fog where time and place dissolve. It's as if her mind is a radio, losing its signal, static, overtaking the melody. Then there's the withdrawal, a quieter but no less profound shift. Evelyn, once the life of every gathering, now sits silently on the couch, her gaze fixed on a point no one else can see. She doesn't join the chatter at Thanksgiving, doesn't ask about Sarah's day. It's not disinterest. Her hazel eyes still soften when Sarah walks in, but the effort of engaging exhausts her. Conversations feel like mazes she can't navigate. Noise grates like sandpaper on her nerves. She retreats into stillness, not because she's stopped caring, but because her brain can't keep pace with the world anymore. Some days, she grows irritable, snapping over a spilled glass. Others, she's eerily calm, detached from the bustle she once thrived in. These aren't quirks of mood. They're the mind adjusting to a body in decline, emotions tangling as expression fades. For Sarah, watching Evelyn pull away feels like losing her twice. Once to the confusion, again to the silence. It's tempting to coax her back, to fill the quiet with questions, or force her into the fray of family life. But Evelyn can't be summoned at will. Her withdrawal isn't rejection, it's survival. Her mind's way of shielding itself from overload. Sarah learned to adapt. She'd sit beside her aunt, holding her hand in the quiet, speaking softly about the roses blooming outside. Evelyn might not reply, but her fingers tightened around Sarah's. A silent bridge across the widening gap. Even when words fail, presence lingers, a tether to the love they've always shared. If you see this in someone dear, forgetfulness deepening, conversations fading, a retreat into their own world, don't dismiss it as mere eccentricity. It's the mind signaling a shift, the body preparing its farewell. This is your cue to be patient, to meet them in their stillness. Create a haven of safety, familiar music, a gentle voice, a space free of chaos. Words may slip from their grasp, but your comfort can still reach them. wrapping them in peace as their journey nears its close. Evelyn taught Sarah that love doesn't need speech to endure. It lives in the quiet, in the being, in the moments you refuse to let slip away. Number 4, frequent infections and slow healing. Think of your grandfather, the one who weathered every storm life threw at him. A scraped knee from a fall didn't faze him. A winter cold barely slowed his stride. He'd bounce back with a grin, his resilience a quiet legend in your family. But now, something's changed. A scratch from pruning the roses lingers, red and stubborn, refusing to fade. A cough he caught at the market stretches into weeks, rattling his chest with a persistence that unsettles you. He used to shrug off sickness like a light rain. Now, every bug seems to cling, every wound to stall. This isn't just bad luck. It's a glaring sign that his body's defenses are crumbling, a whisper that his final year may be unfolding before your eyes. It begins innocently enough. A sniffle turns into a sinus infection that lingers past the usual course of tea and rest. A small cut on his finger, barely a nick, festers instead of healing, the skin around it swelling with quiet defiance. You notice he's sick more often. Colds that once passed in days now drag on, leaving him pale and listless. What's worse, recovery feels like chasing a mirage. Just when you think he's turned a corner, another infection creeps in. Pneumonia, urinary tract infections, even a sore on his leg that won't close. These aren't isolated battles but a pattern, a signal that his immune system, once a steadfast guardian, is lowering its shield. Take George, an 87-year-old widower whose laughter once filled his small apartment. His grandson, Michael, remembers a man who rarely missed a day tending his vegetable patch, dirt under his nails, and pride in his step. But last winter, George caught a cold that wouldn't quit. Antibiotics helped, but a week later, a urinary tract infection struck, sapping his strength. Then came a scrape from a rusty nail. Nothing dramatic, just a shallow mark on his shin. Michael cleaned it, bandaged it, waited. Weeks passed, and the wound stayed raw, weeping faintly despite their care. "I don't know why it's taking so long," George muttered, his voice heavy with frustration. Michael felt the sting of helplessness. This wasn't the invincible Pop he'd known. The reason lies in the body's quiet surrender. As George's circulation slows, blood flows less efficiently, carrying fewer warriors, oxygen, nutrients, white blood cells, to fight invaders or mend breaches. His immune system, stretched thin by age and decline, can't rally as it once did. Antibiotics that used to knock out infections in days now falter, requiring stronger doses, longer courses, or repeated rounds that leave him weary. Skin, once quick to knit itself whole, grows fragile. Bruises bloom from the lightest bump, and sores reopen with the slightest pressure. For someone like George, less mobile since his hip stiffened, pressure sores become a lurking threat, each one a doorway to infections that dig deeper than they should. What's more insidious is how these infections hide. In younger years, a fever would blaze, a loud alarm of trouble, but in the elderly, the signals soften. George didn't spike a temperature with that lingering cough. Instead, he grew quieter, more confused, his appetite fading to nothing. Michael mistook it for a bad day until the doctor explained. In seniors, a sudden dip in alertness often heralds infection, a subtle SOS from a body too weak to sound the usual bells. This shift demands vigilance, a cut that won't heal, a tiredness that deepens without cause, a chill that won't lift. These are clues, not coincidences. For Michael, each setback felt like a blow. He'd drive George to the clinic, stockpile prescriptions, hover with worry as fevers ebbed and flared. It's natural to fight, to push for one more treatment, one more fix, hoping to reclaim the man who taught him to fish by the riverbank. But as infections piled up, Michael saw the truth. George's body wasn't failing him out of spite. It was winding down, its strength reserved for quieter battles. The focus shifted from curing to caring. Michael learned to ease George's days, keeping his skin clean and soft with lotion, offering warm broth when solids felt too heavy, watching for signs with a gentle eye. Healing might stall, but comfort could still flow. If you see this in someone you love, sickness striking too often, wounds lingering like unwelcome guests, don't brush it aside. It's the body signaling its limits, a call to shift from resistance to tenderness. This isn't about giving up. It's about giving more patience, more presence, more peace. George taught Michael that strength isn't always in the fight. Sometimes it's in the stillness, in the care that carries them through. Watch closely, act softly, and you'll hold their dignity intact as time narrows to its precious end. Number 5, major changes in breathing or circulation. Envision your mother, the woman whose steady presence anchored your world, her voice calling you to dinner, her hands kneading dough with a rhythm as reliable as her heartbeat. Now, you sit beside her on the faded floral couch, and something feels off. Her breath comes slower, shallower, a soft ebb where once it flowed unnoticed. You touch her hand, and it's cool, the warmth retreating from her fingertips like a tide pulling back from shore. Her feet, tucked beneath a quilt, feel chilled even in the afternoon sun. These aren't fleeting quirks. They're profound shifts, the body's final telegraph that its journey is nearing a close, a sign that her last year may be unfolding in these quiet, tender moments. Breathing, that invisible thread of life, begins to falter in ways you can't ignore. You notice it first at night. Her chest rises and falls unevenly. A pause stretching too long between inhales, then a quick flurry of shallow gasps. It's not the steady cadence you remember from years of hearing her hum in the kitchen. Sometimes it's a pattern called Cheney-Stokes respiration. Deep, rapid breaths followed by stillness so absolute you hold your own breath, waiting for hers to return. During the day, she tires quickly, her words punctuated by pauses as she catches air. "Just need a minute," she murmurs, smiling faintly, but the effort of shifting in her chair leaves her winded, her lips parting to draw more oxygen than her lungs can hold. Then there's circulation, the silent river that once coursed through her with vigor. Now it ebbs. Her hands, once warm from gardening or stirring pots, grow cold to the touch, the skin paling as blood retreats to protect her core. Her toes, peeking from beneath socks she knitted herself, take on a faint bluish hue, a mottled map of a heart that pumps with less force. You wrap her in blankets, but the chill lingers, not from the room, but from within. She complains of tightness in her chest, a persistent cough bubbling up, wet and gurgling, as fluid gathers in lungs too weary to clear it. Lying flat feels wrong now. She props herself on pillows, her head tilted to ease the strain. Her breaths, a quiet struggle against gravity. Meet Clara, a 79-year-old whose kitchen was once a symphony of clattering pans and simmering soups. Her daughter Emily cherished those days, Clara's apron dusted with flour, her voice lilting as she shared recipes passed down from her own mother. But last spring, Emily saw the change. Clara's breathing grew labored after a short walk to the mailbox, her chest heaving as she sank into a chair. "I'm fine," she'd insist, but her hands stayed icy, even under the sun's gaze. By winter, she slept upright in her recliner, a soft wheeze threading through her dreams. Emily heard the gurgle one night, a sound like water trapped in a pipe, and panic gripped her. The doctor confirmed it. Fluid in the lungs, a heart slowing its beat, a body conserving what little it had left. These changes terrify at first. Emily hovered, urging Clara to breathe deeper, piling on quilts as if warmth could rewind time. She'd watch those pauses in Clara's breath, heart pounding, fearing each might be the last. But this isn't chaos. It's nature's rhythm slowing to its final notes. The body prioritizes survival, funneling blood to vital organs, letting extremities fade. Lungs, once elastic and strong, stiffen. The heart, once a tireless drum, softens its tempo. Clara's shortness of breath wasn't a flaw to fix, but a signal to heed, a call to shift from fear to care. Emily adapted. She kept the room cool, a humidifier humming to ease Clara's lungs. She offered sips of water, held her mother's cold hands, whispered reassurances when the coughing racked her frame. Oxygen tubes arrived, a gentle lifeline, but the goal wasn't to reverse the tide, it was to cradle Clara in comfort. When the end nears, these signs, shallow breaths, chilled skin, a bluish tint, mark the body's quiet retreat. It's not a time for panic, but for presence, a soft touch, a familiar song, a space where she feels safe as her journey closes. If you see this in someone you love, breaths uneven, hands growing cold, don't turn away. It's their body whispering its farewell, a chance for you to listen. Be there, not to fight the inevitable, but to honor it with peace. Clara taught Emily that love isn't in the fixing, it's in the holding, the being, the quiet strength that says, "You're not alone." Final thoughts as we reach the end of this journey. Pause and let these signs settle in your heart. The weight slipping away, the fatigue that clings, the mind drifting, the infections that linger, the breath and pulse slowing to a hush. These 5 markers often weave through the year before an elderly loved one steps into their final rest. They don't always arrive together, nor shout their presence. Some whisper, some linger in shadows, but when they gather, they tell a story. It's the body's gentle preparation, a slow dimming of the light that's burned so brightly for so long. For many, like Emily with Clara or Michael with George, these changes pierce the soul. You want to push back, to coax one more meal, one more step, one more lucid day, hoping to hold time still. But the gift lies not in resistance, but in recognition. These signs aren't harbingers to fear, they're guides to understanding. When you see them, you gain the power to act with purpose, to care better, to plan gently, to fill their days with dignity and love. It's about sitting with Clara as she rests, her breath a soft rhythm against your silence, about laughing with George over a memory, even as his voice fades, about holding Evelyn's hand as she gazes into a world only she sees. This isn't surrender, it's strength. Knowing what's ahead lets you craft moments that matter. A story shared, a photo revisited, a quiet "I love you" that echoes beyond words. You ensure their final chapter is less about struggle and more about peace, less about what's lost and more about what's cherished. If these signs touch someone you hold dear, breathe deep. You're not alone on this path. Countless families have walked it, finding solace in preparation, courage in clarity. It's never easy, but it's a road you can travel with grace, knowing each step honors the life they've lived and the love you'll always carry. Thank you for staying with me through this. Reflect on what you've learned. Perhaps it's the weight loss you'll watch for, the fatigue you'll ease, the confusion you'll meet with patience. Share it below. One insight, one way you'll carry this forward. Your voice matters. It fuels this space, inspires others, keeps us connected. If this stirred you, if it lit a spark of understanding, pass it on. Tell a friend, hold it close. Together, we'll keep weaving stories that inform, uplift, and remind us what it means to love through every season.